Welcome to episode 18 of Smitty's Endurance Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Smith. I'd like to welcome onto the show today, Steve Watson. Steve has been one of the most consistent paddlers around with 11 ARCM race finishes, 7 of those in the top 10. His career spans about 27 years. Steve is also well known as an educator and successful volleyball coach for Onaway schools. Steve, thanks for joining me today.
Glad to be here, Dave.
So, man, you guys are just coming off a district championship for volleyball, eh?
Yeah. I didn't think we'd ever win one when I started coaching. And honestly, I'm not sure how many we've won now. I think it's 9, but we had never had any success, and I didn't know what I was doing, and we got going in a hurry, and we've had a lot of success over the years.
Yeah, and we'll certainly talk a ton about paddling. How did you get into the volleyball coaching? Did you somehow play back in the day, or?
No, I played soccer and tennis in high school. I played soccer twice a year from first grade right on through. That was my love of my life for sports.
Okay.
But I always thought volleyball was kind of cool. They didn't have boys volleyball. So when I started teaching, about my second year teaching, something like that, a new coach came in and needed somebody to help. And I said I would, and I didn't really know much other than gym class, and so I learned some stuff that year. And then a couple of years later, a new coach came along and they needed somebody to coach JV. And I did that for 2 years. And then the athletic director basically wanted me to take over varsity. And I started, 19 years ago, I think. So I've been going on it ever since.
Awesome. And you've been at Onaway the whole time, or?
Yeah, the whole time. My grandparents, they built a cottage on Black Lake just outside Onaway back in the 40s. My mom had been coming here every single year of her life. So Onaway was, along with Grayling, because I had grandparents in Grayling and Onaway, it was, just like another place that I spent my life. And so I wanted to live in Northern Michigan when I got out of college. And as it turned out, Onaway had a job of all places. So. Oh,
that's interesting. So yeah, Steve, if you don't mind, kind of take us back a bit, talk to us a bit about where you grew up, a bit about, your family growing up and your family now, and just elaborate a bit on your upbringing.
I grew up in Redford. I went to Redford Thurston High School. That's where I spent 18 years of my life. And like I said, I played soccer, had a lot of good friends there. I was in the band, I was a pretty good student. And, I think it was a good childhood for sure. Canoe racing certainly wasn't part of my family's lifestyle, although I have family that were in it, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later. Once I got into Michigan State, I really didn't know I was going to go into education until literally my last semester there. I was graduating with English, and I kind of saw myself being a newspaper writer, which, they don't make a lot of money either. But one of my friends was getting into the education field as a post-grad student. And I thought, I think I might like that. And if nothing else, I thought it was something else I could maybe consider doing. And if I didn't want to keep doing it later, I could probably get away from it. But that just kind of took me on the trajectory I've been on ever since, which is in education. But those 18 years of my life living in Redford, I grew up a mile from Detroit border. And it was kind of a neat place where I lived. We had subdivisions on either side of us on our street, but my particular street, and kids around here don't find it interesting at all, but my street, I lived on an acre of land, and we had pheasants and we had rabbits. And one time we even had a deer run through our property, which again, Northern Michigan kids, like, what's the big deal? Well, where I live, it was like the equivalent of seeing Bigfoot, so we had some of that we had fields and different things like that around. And it was just a really good place to grow up. And I was pretty fortunate, my mom and dad raising us where we did and how they did.
Awesome. So Steve, you mentioned a couple of the sports that you played growing up. When did you eventually get into paddling?
Well, it was 1987. My Aunt Janet, this would be Janet Kolka, Jack Kolka's wife, my aunt and uncle. Aunt Janet was down at our house for a few days because my grandma she'd been getting treatments for cancer. And I must not have had much going on. I must not have had a job at that time during the summer, and she was coming back up north. They lived in Pinconning, but they had a place in Grayling, and I guess I just had time to spare, and so I just came up with her for a few days. And as it happened to be on marathon weekend, and I knew about the marathon. My uncle had done really well. My cousins had raced in it, but I had never seen a canoe race in my life. So that was pretty much all I knew, that they were really good. And so as it turned out that year, my cousin Mark Kolka was racing. It turns out it was his last marathon. And so Aunt Janet says, well, we'll go watch the race. And Uncle Jack and Jeff, they were down in Florida actually at the time. They weren't there for the race. So, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. And, we watched the start of the race. And I remember talking to Mark before the race, like maybe a day or two before. And I said something to the effect of, he was getting his canoe all ready. And I said, oh, you going to win? And he says, no. He's like, no, we're not going to win. He's like, I just want to make sure we finish. And I kind of was like, what are you talking about? Why not go after the win? And I just didn't get it. That was the first year Serge Corbin and Brett Stockton raced, and Mark was really good, but he also knew, like, hey, this is going to be, we're going to have a good race, but beating those guys, that's a different, story altogether. But I watched that race, them go into the dark. I remember distinctly seeing them come through Luzerne Park. I don't know why that one stands out to me so much, but coming through there, somebody threw a flashlight on them, and you could actually see the red liquid in their hose that he was drinking as they went by. And I remember just asking questions after question. Just everything was just like, this is amazing. Like, how are they? And that's 4 hours into the race, as you know. And I was just thinking, like, how is this possible? And it was just instant. It was just I was hooked immediately. And in fact, at McMaster's previously, an hour earlier, Aunt Janet said, everybody came through, and she's like, all right, you want to go home? And I said, what do you mean? She's like, oh, we'll go home, go to bed. I said, can't we just keep going? I want to watch it. So we did. It was just me and her. We followed the whole race. We fell asleep at McKinley and woke up, and it was, kind of light out. And I still remember seeing Lynn Whitty and Nancy Shellhorse come through McKinley. It was a little bit light already. They were the top female team. Just an amazing experience, and something I was just addicted to right away. And it was the next year I watched the race again. And then it was like trying to get to some shorter races. And then eventually, when I was a freshman in college, I got my first canoe and started to paddle.
Okay. So in 87, how old were you at that point?
I was 15.
15.
And I just was like thinking, I'm living in the wrong place. I need to get near where I can get into a canoe.
Yeah. Awesome. So your freshman year, you're at Michigan State. How did you kind of get rolling? So you got a canoe, and then was that canoe a C1 or was that a C2, and you started paddling with other people? Or
no, I knew I needed a C1 right off the get-go, because you especially when you're new, you can't count on having somebody else to paddle with. And I thought, well, if I've got a C1, I can always paddle. And it was Larry Truel, who was a longtime amateur paddler back then. He lived in Detroit, and he was selling, it's kind of a boat of a C1 today, but back then I was just happy to get into a C1 at all. Mm-hmm. Sold me a Winona J180 Kevlar boat, where the gunnels are probably like 2.5, 3 inches wider than your hips. Real stable boat. I don't think it stopped me from tipping over a couple times, but then I bought. I think I bought my first paddle off of Tom Cannon. It was a Barton paddle, and I only had one paddle. Those things are pretty dang tough, so it wasn't going to hurt me to have one paddle for a little while. But that year, my freshman year, I started, the Cannons played a significant role in my development as a paddler, and not just me either, but, John Sullivan and Tad Hill, Zach Hill, different people, Jim Myers, I think probably. They let me keep my boat at their place, and I would just ride my bike over to they're right off campus, right off of Hagedorn. And I would ride my bike over there, get in the boat. And sometimes I'd paddle C1 by myself. Sometimes, if I was lucky, maybe Tom or Connie would take me out. I was really raw. I wasn't any good. I had no strength. When we'd go out C1 with other people, I was always just getting dusted. It was really demoralizing, but I just, kept at it. And that was, a learning experience for sure. I think one of the big things I learned, it took me a long time to learn this, is I just didn't train hard enough or simply enough to really make the impact I wanted to do for later on. I learned that over time, but nonetheless, it didn't stop me from loving what I was doing. And I just kept at it and kept learning and training and finding out new stuff.
Yeah. So Steve, after your freshman year, so you started, how many years until you did your first marathon?
Well, I knew it was going to be a couple years because I had to learn. So right about 93 or 94. So I was a freshman. I graduated high school in 1990. So basically spring of 91 is when I started paddling. So around 93, 94, I started seriously trying to get to the level where I wanted to get in the marathon. And, I couldn't find somebody that would race with me. I wanted somebody that was older than me, that had experience, that could kind of take me under their wing. And, I was still pretty raw, so nobody was really calling me up either. But so I went a couple years there before I could really get something figured out. In 1994, Greg Barton called me, not to race the marathon, but he called me to be his feeder for the Finlandia Clean Water Challenge, which is a kayak race that went from Chicago to New York City. It's a 30-day stage race.
Wow. And
he had talked to Bruce, and Bruce had about finding somebody to feed for him. And Bruce mentioned me. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll do that. And then he told me he was going to pay me. I'm like, wait a second, I do this stuff for free. And it was like a summer job for me for that month. It was amazing. Wow. But that was another year that I didn't paddle the marathon. And in 95, he won in 94. So he came back in 95 and we did it again. He raced. I was his feeder. Unbelievable experience. All the stories I got to hear from Greg and got to be friends with him. People that don't know, he's a 2-time gold medalist and a 2-time bronze medalist and a multi-world championship. So just hanging out with that guy was just quite an experience. But so there's 94, and then 95, he raced it again. And then finally, 96, I did my first General Clinton with Jason Hall from Grayling. He was just a high school senior, I think, at the time. And I was in college, and, we got our butts handed to us pretty good, but it was our first major race. I'd done Spikes with Tad Hill once, and Spikes back then went from Grayling all the way to Mayo. So I had one long race, and then we did the Clinton, and then Jason was teamed up with Mo Harwood, and I was trying to find somebody, and I called a few different people, and I called Andy Trebold, who was a friend of mine, and he had never done the marathon, and said, hey, my goal was not to race with a new person, even as good as Andy was. But I figured, we got along really well, and he's fast, and, maybe he wants to do it this year. So I asked him, and he said he didn't want to do it. And then maybe a few days or a week later, he called me back and said that he had second thoughts. His mom and dad had kind of talked him into doing it, saying, you're probably going to do it at some point. Why not do it with Steve? You guys get along real well, and there won't be any pressure, because he probably figured at some point he was going to race with his dad, and his dad had already had at least one second place finish in the marathon. So it was 1996. We did the race, and, it was just everything that you hear about in the race for people's first marathon. I mean, we came out of town. We were just outside the top 10, maybe. We'd had one really good race up in the Sioux, really, really good race. So we knew we had some speed, but I mean, when things get dark, it's a different world, as you know. So, yeah. We just kind of progressively went further back as the race continued. My shoulder started hurting really bad. We hit a stump in the middle. I mean, just like some random stump in the middle. I probably would know it exactly today, but at the time I didn't know the river that well. Hit some stump, hit us dead, tipped over one time. I think we had the slowest or second slowest time from Camp 10 to Mayo. Okay. But then in the daytime, it was about what I was hoping for the whole race. In the daylight, we had top 15 split times or point-to-point times the whole way. So, the damage was already done, but we were recovering, and we bounced back and had some good times, and we beat some good teams, and we learned a lot along the way. And Andy was he was just getting started into how good he was, but even then, had he had somebody a lot better than me, he'd have been top 10 his first year.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like quite the start as far as your marathon journey went. And you could probably say you're semi-responsible for getting Andy into the marathon, eh?
Well, maybe. I mean, he said something about how he didn't really have a desire to do the race. But it's kind of one of those things, if you're racing in Michigan, it's kind of at some point you're probably going to do it if you're at all serious about it. So,
Yeah.
the next year he raced with his dad, and I wasn't there the next year. It's one of the, I think might be the only marathon. I've missed 2 marathons ever since I've started watching or racing. But he raced with his dad the next year, and they were 7th or 8th. Had a good race. And the next year he didn't race, and that's when I was. So that would have been my second year in '98. That was my first top 10, and he was. I remember seeing him along the shore. So it was just I never, having done the first one, 96, finishing 22nd place. To me the top 10, it was like the gold at the end of a rainbow. It's supposed to be there, but it's just not going to be there when you get there. It's just never going to happen. People that finish that high are just out of my league, and here Mike Packard and I did it in my second marathon. So very special for sure. And obviously Andy went on, he took several years off and then got back into it. And from the very beginning, he got back into it. He was winning or really close to winning. So.
Yeah. So Steve, talk a little bit about that your progression, how from where you started to, to then that first top 10. And then from there, it seemed like, you've just been so consistent over the years. What did that progression look like? I mean, was it just hard training or combination of different things? Talk to us about that.
It's funny. We were talking volleyball earlier, and it's very similar. When I started coaching volleyball, Onaway had no districts and no conference championships, and it just seemed like an unattainable goal. And I should have known better, because canoe racing had taught me otherwise. Canoe racing had taught me that if you work really hard, and one thing that gets overlooked, I mean, I figured we'd talk about it at some point, but gets overlooked by people, and I stress this to newer paddlers that show a lot of promise or a lot of desire, is learning from people who know more about the sport than you. There are a lot of people out there who are fast, but they don't know that much, really. They're just fast. They're just really physical beasts and monsters. They either have great endurance, a lot of speed, or a lot of power, a lot of punch, that kind of thing. But that doesn't necessarily make them great paddlers. So I think the number one thing for me was I tried to paddle with people better than me and people that knew more than me as much as humanly possible. And considering where I started, that was going to be happening like pretty much on a daily basis. I mean, everybody knew more than me and they were better than me. But spending time around Tom and Connie Cannon, Bruce Barton, Jeff Kolka, my cousin Jeff, Butch Stockton. I saw you had him on here Butch is a good friend of mine, and he's influenced just a ton of people. Those people have had big impacts, and I'm still learning. Like, I still feel when I'm around them, I still feel like I'm the little kid, because when they were coaching me, training me up and giving me tidbits of information, I was 20, 21 years old, wet behind the ears, and just the learning curve was huge. But I would say that was a really big part of how I got better, was seeing what they did and then trying to apply it to myself, whether it was like the amount of hours they're putting in, or the stroke that they used, or how they were riding waves, or how they ran the river. I just gobbled it up, just dying for more information. And so I'm a huge sports fan. I love sports. I watch a lot of professional sports and college sports. And every once in a while, they'll make a comment about some player who, is in the film room all the time or is asking questions. And I just think, don't they all do that? I mean, how can they not? I mean, what are they're shortchanging themselves if they're not. The guys that don't spend all that time learning from other people, it's just a huge mistake. And maybe it's an arrogance level on their part. But for me, it's just finding those people to spend time around with them and learning from them, and then copying what they do and trying to apply it to myself. I think that's the biggest reason I was able to move up through the ranks and then sort of established a foothold. And, like you said, I've been pretty consistent.
Yeah. So Steve, you mentioned some of those different people you learned from. Could you maybe pick one or two key things that, really maybe helped you get to that next level that those people taught you?
Yeah, I mean, different things from different people for sure. I was lucky enough to have a couple of summers where I trained almost exclusively with Jeff or John Sullivan. Jeff was racing with Surge and I was in Grayling, and we trained together most every day. And then there was a couple of years there where John did the same thing. He was paddling with Louis Bertillon from Quebec, and I was racing with Al Shaver from New York. So it was a natural partnership for the Michigan stuff. We trained a lot together, did some races. And so those guys, I got to spend a lot of time in a boat with them, but I've also been out with Butch, like I said, and when I was in college, a lot with Bruce and Roxanne and Tom and Connie. So, I guess I'll put it kind of this way. Jeff taught me how to run the river. And not just him, of course. I mean, I learned that from John as well, and Butch and these different people, but what separates him, I think, from a lot of people is he's so unbelievably precise with what he's doing. And I'll give you a quick example. You and everybody else who's done the marathon or race on the ensemble or just paddle on the ensemble in general, you're paddling along and you come across a gravel bar or a sandbar, and your paddle hits the bottom and you don't know it's there, and it bounces the boat a little bit, maybe kicks it up on the side. And Jeff he said something about this one time, and I just kept paddling. I'm in the stern. And then he goes, it happened again. He goes, now right there, why'd you do that? I said, well, Jeff, I didn't do that on purpose. I hit the bottom of the river and it just kicked us upright. He goes, well, that just took me off from not just this corner, but the corner that we're coming up next to. And he was already thinking about being in a particular line on the water, setting us up for the corner that we're heading to, but how that was going to affect the next corner too. Like he's always thinking like chess. If I have to adjust on this corner, that means I'm gonna have to adjust on the next corner, which means I'm using that much more energy or that much more distance or whatever it happened to be that was gonna affect us in a negative way. That's how precise he is and was. And that's what allowed him and Bill Taranjo in 93 to get away and take the lead on Serge and Solomon. And obviously it did him well later on when he was winning all those races too. But so that's one of those things I learned from Jeff. And John did a lot of the same things too, and Butch. I remember distinctly training with a large group of paddlers. I don't remember who I was in the boat with. I was in the stern. I'm probably in the stern 80% of the time. And we were down on the corners between Indian Cut and McMaster's. I think those are some of the toughest corners around because they're just wide enough that you have to deal with eddies, and they're just tight enough that you really have to kind of keep on it to make the turn. I think they're real challenging corners. But I was running the river the way I always do, just going from point to point, running the eddy lines from left eddy line to the next corner, right eddy line. So I'm just trying to go as straight down the river as I can. And there was a paddler that was with us who had a lot of marathons under his belt. And he said, Steve, do you always paddle the river this way? And I said, yeah, every day. Every time, just like Jeff, just like Butch. And it just kind of blew my mind that here are some people that have been doing this longer than I have, and they still hadn't figured it out. And, that's the kind of stuff I learned from those guys. Butch, when to go, when you have to go hard. Bruce, I learned, about sprints and how to prepare for, we did a lot of intervals down there. Tom and Connie, they taught me a lot of the basic stuff, how to get a proper stroke. But it's that really precise stuff that I learned from Jeff and from John and from Butch that, allowed me to make the marathon kind of my race. I don't know if I'm necessarily physically, that's my best, should be my best race, but I feel I've always said that I know the river and I can run the river better than anybody outside of Grayling. That doesn't live in Grayling, with the exception of maybe like somebody like Rick Joy. The guy's got like 100 marathons and all that. So I'm not the strongest guy in the world. I'm not too bad, but I figured I have to be really precise and efficient to do well in the race. And that's the kind of stuff I learned from those guys. And that you just have to hurt. You're a triathlete. Like to do well. A lot of people don't get it. You just have to suffer. That's why I've always said wrestlers make great paddlers, because they know how to suffer. And I'm not a wrestler, but they know how to do it.
Sure. Well, thanks for sharing all that. So Steve, probably know the answer to this question, but I assume the marathon would be your favorite event that you've raced, but are there a couple others that you've really enjoyed participating in over the years?
Marathon, I have a love-hate relationship with it.
Sure.
It's so stressful and I get so worked up about it. I don't know how people can do it and not be nervous, but
Yeah.
apart from that race, I've always enjoyed the General Clinton race. In fact, this year I was really gearing up for that race. I really felt like I got robbed of an opportunity last year with COVID coming in. And so, Patrick Madden and I were going to race it again. We actually paddled really well the last time we did it. We finished, I think, 14th or something like that, which was a disappointment. We wanted to be in the top 10, but there were a lot of good teams that year. And I told Patrick halfway through that race, I said, we're racing really well. That was our first race together. I said, just happens to be everybody else is paddling really well too. So I really wanted to go back out there and, do something special. I've got one top 10 out there and a whole bunch of other races that were in the teens. There's something, I imagine it's the same way they feel about coming here. Something special about going there. I've got a lot of friends in New York. I've done, I'd have to look, but probably over half my marathons have been with people from the state of New York. So there's a lot of people I like to see out there. And, the first time I went out there, I was a freshman in college. I was feeding for Lynn Whitty and Dave Shepard and Roxanne Barton and Lynn Capon. I was doing 2 teams. And that was my first time out there. Didn't know anything about the race and just loved the area. And just, went out there every year, either to feed for somebody or then I eventually started racing it myself. I don't know if I want to say that I enjoy the race itself as much as I just like being in that area and having there's a special feel about it, I guess. And the fact that I learned about it when I was first starting out as a racer, maybe that's part of why it is kind of special to me. Apart from that, I think I always enjoyed the Blissfield race that Bill Fick put on. It was kind of the end of the year. And I had some good races down there. Not the most picturesque race course that people would talk about, but I always kind of like going there. I raced. I had a race here in Onaway for 12 years, and that was kind of neat because I could race on my home water. I got to sleep in my own bed, and it was one of those races that went by really fast for me because I knew every corner, every rock, every log. Other people, it was kind of tougher, but it was a 2-hour race in springtime. We always had the worst weather. People still. They still talk to me about how bad that weather is every single year on the Onaway race. So that was kind of a race that was special, but I was always glad to see it over. It was the one weekend of the year that I was glad that was done because it was so much work to make that race happen. Yeah. But it was a good race course. A lot of people really enjoyed it.
Okay. So Steve, kind of keep it on that same track. What are a couple of your most memorable races that you've had over the years?
Yeah, so we were talking about that earlier. That's the challenge. I can tell you one marathon I was racing with Amy Solak, and we were paddling. We paddled well together, but I remember all 3 of my kids were born, and we came through at Whirlpool down below Foot, and we came around the corner, and the girls were out in the water swimming, and here we come around the corner, and they start cheering for us, and Greta was as far out in the water as she could get. She must have been 3 years old or something. And she just calmly, "Hi, Dad." And my wife Amber told me later that, it was a hot day that day and they were not happy about getting out of the water to come see me at the finish line. But that was kind of a neat memory. But the story I usually tell that sticks out the most, I had a series of second place finishes with John Sullivan in 2000. We finished in second at Alpena by, it was a sprint to the finish with my cousin Ted Kolka and Tim Velko. They tried dropping us several times. That was kind of my coming out party, that race. There weren't a ton of good paddlers in that race. For some reason, there were a lot of people that were missing, but several times in that race, they tried to drop us and they just could not get rid of us. And it was right to the bitter end. And they got us. It was literally a couple feet. Their bow beat us by. And then the next weekend, we went down to Bay City and we finished second there. that one was pretty remarkable in that we got away from Ken and Steve Collins in doing so, which those guys were unbelievable grinders. And then the following week was the Curly race, and that was absolutely loaded with good teams. And I kind of thought our streak had run out at that point. John was still totally confident. And we came over the wall at Cook, top 5 or 6, and we stayed in a pack across foot. And I don't remember how the pack broke up, but I remember us going over the wall at foot, and we got down at the bottom in first, and we took off, and it was Jeff and Bruce that were able to stay with us. And I always say nothing good has ever happened to me below foot dam. The best thing that has ever happened down there is I've been able to keep my spot. So we battled those guys out neck and neck the whole way, all the way down to foot. Down to Oscoda, and they had us a couple of corners. We'd actually scouted it out the day before. There's a couple of corners where they were trying to drop us, and we took a little different line, and they couldn't get rid of us. It was it probably had to be pretty frustrating because those two guys, Jeff and Bruce, were the guys that were trying to hang on to. They were still in their prime. I mean, Jeff was winning the marathon every year. And the only reason they got rid of us was the last straightaway before the last corner. It was super, super shallow that year. We were right out in the middle of the river, and we were on their stern, like directly on their stern, setting ourselves up for a chance to break their stern and get over the stern wave and then sprint them to the finish. And they went over a shallow spot that normally isn't shallow, and their boat took away the water, and we basically ran aground and lost about 3 boat lengths, and that was it. And it was so frustrating because a lot of people probably don't know this, but I've never won a professional C2 race. I've been second several times, never won. I'm still waiting for that to happen. I don't know if it's ever going to happen, but that one's still, John and I still talk about that was 20 years ago. And so I'm still a little bitter about it, but if you want to hear about my most memorable marathon, but it's quite a wild ride. That story is.
Yeah, no, please. I mean, if you have time, I'd love to hear it.
All right. So I'll try to keep it as short as possible. But I was always afraid of in the marathon, a couple things. I was always afraid of having to go number 2 in the race. You've heard that story from different people. Always afraid of that. I was always afraid of lightning. I was afraid of big waves on the ponds. And I was afraid of getting sick. So in 2002, 3 hours into the race, right below McMaster's, I was racing with Al Shaver. We had raced 2 years before, and we finished 7th. That had been my previous best finish, and it was a great race for us. Beat a lot of good teams. Right below McMaster's, we were hanging on to Clark Kent and Louis Bertium. So we'd been running like top 5 or 6 all night, 3 hours. And I started to get sick and started throwing up. And Al and I had talked about, if you ever drop out of this race, I'm going to do it early, not late. I'm not going to be one of these like 3 hours from the end, can't make it anything. So he says, we started to lose Clark and Louis, and he goes, well, what do you want to do? And I just said, I don't know. So we just kept paddling. And then about an hour later, I got sick again. He says, well, what do you want to do? I don't know. I just couldn't bring myself to get out of the race, even though I was throwing up. And what was really bad about it, and this hasn't happened since, every time I would suck on the hose to get my water, my drink, that suction would make me sick to my stomach. So now I'm throwing up and I'm not replenishing my drinks. I mean, a little bit with some Ensure that I'm drinking. And I remember going over a couple of dams, and Connie Cannon was there, and she gave me some water bottles. I would drink that as I was running, but that was it. And it ended up being a warm night too. I think I don't know if it got below 70. So that doesn't sound warm to people that don't do the marathon, but
right.
It is. So anyway, we continued to do that all night long. About every 45 minutes to an hour, I would throw up, and we just kept going. And even in the middle of that, we caught back up to 5th place, and then I got sick and we lost it. And then in the middle, down there around McKinley, the lightning comes out, and it was kind of cool and kind of scary at the same time. For a brief second there, you can see the entire river, and then you can't see anything. And so, we all had to deal with it, but it was a little scary. But that came and went. Then morning came around, and I stopped getting sick, but I'm sure the effects were still there. I must have been incredibly dehydrated. We got down to foot, and the waves started coming in. We started to deal with that as best we could. And the the grass field there, the weed patch right before you turn left, the one that's at the end of the long straightaway.
Yeah.
As we're coming in there, we went through that spot, and it was the most physically tired I've ever been in my entire life. People always ask you, do you take a break during the race? And no, we don't take a break. We went through that weed patch, and I got out the other side, and I stopped paddling for 2 strokes, which is like, to me, the equivalent of, not paddling for an hour. It's just, I had never done that before, other than to get something to eat or drink or something like that. I mean, I was just completely exhausted, and started to continue to paddle. Like I said, 2 strokes, that was it. Got in a foot, and the waves are bouncing off the wall. So it got a little dicey there, but, made it across. So here I've dealt with being sick, and I've dealt with waves, and I've dealt with lightning all in one race. And we reached down over the wall. Back then they didn't have the stairs that they have. It's, a lot like Cook, where you're reaching down, the wall's still the same height, but
yeah.
I pull the boat up on the wall, and we run over the top of the hill, and we get to the bottom. And that's what normally would happen, except what was actually happening is I had passed out. It's on video. My dad's got it on video, where you can just see my head kind of just tilt over. I had leaned over, pulled the boat up on the side, but then passed out laying there, and nobody in the crowd could tell. And I'm hearing the crowd cheering, and in my head, I think I'm running down the hill. That's the next thing you do. And I thought that's what was happening. And then all of a sudden, what I see is my canoe is like right there in front of me. I'm looking at the letters on the side of my boat. So in that moment, I realized that I was unconscious. I had no idea how long. So I get up and go over the top of the hill. And my wife, who at that time was not my wife, Amber, I said to her as I'm going down the hill, I didn't know where I was. Like, I must have passed out. And she was at a loss for words. She didn't know what to say. So we just kept going. I got down to the bottom, and I asked my feeders, Fritz Lamb, who was a longtime paddler. I said, Fritz, how long were we up there? He's like 15 or 20 seconds. I mean, I had no clue. And I said, well, I told him what happened. He's like, well, just take all those corners wide. I said, well, you tell me when somebody comes around the corner. And that's what, 4 or 5 minutes from the dam to the next corner. And we're just going around the corner. I can kind of hear somebody go, here they come. So we knew we had 5 or 6 minutes on the boat behind us, and we'd never lost our spot. Me being sick, me passing out, and down at Whirlpool, I look back, and here they are, like about a minute and a half back. And I thought, no, we've held on to 7th. We could have been better than that, but we've held on to 7th. We can't do it. And we actually picked it up, and we put 2 minutes on them. It was Eric Pajaski and Dave Jensen had made a huge comeback on us, and we put 2 minutes on them from Whirlpool to the end. And I got across the finish line, and I was basically choking back the tears. And it was because I couldn't believe I had done that to myself. It's just, what did you just do? I mean, like, that's just insane. Passing out, throwing up, doing all that. But at the same time, the relief and the joy of having held on, it was an incredibly confusing, emotional experience that I was basically in tears about. Just unreal. And I kind of came away from that saying, if anybody ever questions my toughness after this race, they can go to hell, because that was brutal. And maybe about a month later, I thought about that race again, and it just really frustrated me, because the pack that we were with, when we were with Clark and those guys, they made it all the way up into a battle for second place. And I'm not saying we would have finished second, but I think we'd have been in that group, and we would have had a chance to fight for it. But just a unbelievable story. I actually tell that story in class every year when we read The Pit and the Pendulum, where Edgar Allan Poe talks about a guy who passes out and doesn't know if he's awake or not. So I wouldn't suggest anybody do that. My dad was even questioning his how good of a dad he was for letting me continue in the race. And I said, Dad, you would have had to chain me to the wall at that point of the race for me to not continue. I mean, there's just no way. We'd have floated the rest of the way, lost a couple spots, but we were finishing that race.
Yeah. Wow. That's quite the story. No, I know for me, that's, one of the reasons I enjoy these endurance events is just the physical and mental challenge and the different things you have to overcome,
Oh, it's torturous. Have you done Ironman?
Yeah, I've done 3 of them.
Yeah. So I just think, like, that's just, I know that doesn't take as long as the South Marathon, but I just think that's nuts. I think, like, you guys being able to transfer from one sport to the next and then just continue to do that. I mean, running a marathon, I don't have much interest in doing that, but then to add all the other things that you guys do with it, I mean, I think it's more brutal than what we're doing, without question.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done both. I think it's different. I think the mentality of the people doing both events, certainly at at the higher level, is quite similar. It's just different training, but if you ever spent the time doing it, I bet you could do it. You have the mentality for sure. So Steve,
maybe.
you've mentioned quite a few of your partners over the years. So I guess where I'd like to go with this question is maybe talk a bit about what you look for when you're trying to find the different partners that you've raced with over the years. What makes a good fit for you?
That's a good question, because, if you look at my career, there's a lot of years that I didn't do the race. I mean, you said 27 years. I mean, there were so many years that I could have raced and I chose not to because I didn't get the right partner or the person that I was looking for. So first off, having a good personality goes a long, long way. I think, I've asked, when I was looking at different partners or thinking about different people, I would question other people about those people and say, hey, if I didn't know them already myself, like with Patrick, for example, I'd seen Patrick race a couple marathons, and, I was I wasn't racing because I had back trouble, but I was still, like, the marathon would not leave my mindset. And I kept thinking, one day, someday, and then here I see this guy that's like finishing 11th, 12th, 13th with guys from out of state who aren't these big, huge guys that I thought, are similar to me, Adam Jelinas and Phil Millspaw and guys like that. And I thought, well, what could a guy like that do with somebody who knows the river, who has, home field advantage, has feeders, has a boat, sponsors, there's a lot of comfort level that comes with all those things. And so I always look for people like that might be looking for somebody with my experience or knowledge. But yeah, I made phone calls. I called Holly Reynolds and said, hey, do you know Patrick Madden? What's he like? And John Webb knew Patrick because he trained with him a little bit down in Florida. So they all said really positive things, and Patrick and I have gotten along great. And, we even went out to his place this summer after we got out of school. We weren't racing, but we were training together. So personality is a big thing for me. I've been, gotten along great with my partners. Al Shaver is still a good friend of mine. I saw him out there this summer, went and saw him and his wife, Tammy. We stayed out there with them. And Mike Packard, super great guy. Fun person to be around. So personality is a big one. Next one is, are they going to take it as seriously as I am? Do they have the same kind of goals that I do? If they're already an established paddler who's done really well, then you really don't have to worry about it, because obviously that's something they've shown. If there's somebody that maybe hasn't had any top 10s or is a little bit newer, you might want to look into a little bit. But, kind of going into every one of my marathons, I knew what these people were all about. Mike Packard was a really good paddler out in New York and had a lot of success out there, and he'd come to Michigan and done well. But I saw somebody that knew more than I did, and that, perhaps me being a home guy could, we could maybe put something together. And that's how we broke in our first top 10 together. So looking for people that train like I do, want the same things. For me, you mentioned the top 10s, not finishing in the top 10 to me is like a devastation. It's everything to me. And if I don't think I've got a real good shot at it, I'm not getting in usually. I'm not getting in. So they got to have that mindset, and, are they going to be willing to suffer? And basically the people that do the marathon that do well, they're all willing to suffer. They're all willing to go out there and paddle hard. And when I say suffer, I mean, you're 9 hours in and somebody's trying to take off. Is the partner going to want to stick with them, or are they going to let them go? And, pretty much far and wide, the paddlers I've had the pleasure to be in a boat with for the marathon or the General Clinton have all had the same mindset, which is it's go to work time. So that's a big part of it for me too. I think those are probably the two biggest things, really. Also maybe a little bit if they have the same sort of strategy I do. Do they want to ride waves when they can? Are they willing to grind it out and sprint away from people if they can do that too?
Yeah, awesome. So Steve, I'd like to learn a little bit more about, you talk about the training. What do you have a specific kind of training philosophy that you use, or maybe walk us through some of the different things you do to get yourself ready, for the marathon and then just canoe racing in general?
Yeah, well, for me, I'm always thinking about it, but in general, my serious training starts in December, where I start lifting weights a lot. I don't know if I enjoy lifting weights, but I enjoy the results I get from lifting weights. And it's one of those things that you can kind of, if you can't see it, you can certainly feel it, but you can usually see it too. You can see the different numbers changing hands, going up, hopefully in your, what I'm lifting. I kind of like cross country skiing, but I have an issue with my fingers. It seems like if it's anything below 20 degrees, my last couple fingers will start to go numb. And then, man, they hurt like the dickens when they start to warm up. So I kind of have to be a little careful with that. But I'll play hockey and stuff like that in the winter. I've done that a lot. My wife and I will do some workouts where it's cardio related stuff. But then of course the training in the boat happens, in February. I start looking for days where the weather is tolerable. This February, like I think I had the most hours I ever had for the marathon this year, because in February we had like 32-degree days, which, isn't great, but for February, it's not bad. And I was just kind of bored with what I was doing indoors. And I thought, I'm just going to go paddle. And I ended up getting maybe like 15 hours in February in Michigan, northern Michigan. And it's just kind of got me going a little bit, got a little extra kickstart. But I always feel like, for me, I always set 30 hours as my minimum goal for the end of March. And I know there's some people out there that have way, way more than that, maybe because they're crazy. Maybe it's because they're in warmer climates. But I always kind of look at that as sort of a standard. And there's been some years where I haven't been able to get there because the weather's been really bad, or, maybe I got sick for a week or something. But most years it happens. And so I set that goal as like 30 hours a month. And I'm always trying to like get more than that. This year I did really, really well with my training. I was well ahead of schedule all spring, all summer. And, once it starts to warm up a little bit, usually by, about the beginning of April, somewhere in there, you get some of those warmer days, some days not so much. I start getting some of my longer paddles. And some people will do longer paddles like right off the get-go. But I generally don't, unless I'm going to Florida for spring break. And, I go with the whole family. So I'll usually paddle anywhere from 2 to 4 hours a day. And I do that just because it's warm out. It's nice to paddle in shorts and a t-shirt, more than it is with gloves and all the other stuff. So, and then when, on the weekends and stuff, we'll do the long paddles. If I'm not doing the General Clinton, I'm always training like I'm doing the General Clinton. I'm always thinking like that's the level I want to be at by the end of May. I want to be ready to do that race. And that'll set me up really well for the marathon. And once school gets out, because I'm teaching till, the beginning of June, once school gets out, I'm not doing as many long training runs. I do a lot more of it in April and May, and, occasional one here and there in the summer, but it's not as vital to me, I think, at that point. I probably did more this year than normal. But I guess I was also really motivated. A lot of people were, obviously. We're all bummed out from the previous year. Mm-hmm. So that training just kind of continues into the marathon.
So Steve, when you mentioned long paddle, what's a long paddle for you when you're training?
That's a good question, because not that long compared to some people. Eric Batway is a friend of mine. I blew his mind this year. We did a couple of long training runs. I won't go to mile. I won't go town to mile. I've never done a town to mile run in my entire life, except in the marathon or during the Spikes race. Okay. For me, 4.5 hours is kind of my max. Now, I've done some longer stuff when I was younger and was still learning what I like to do. But the whole purpose to me about doing a long training run is to learn how to paddle efficiently when you're tired, and to learn how to still put power on the paddle when you're tired. So 3 hours, after about 3 hours, if you're paddling pretty solidly, you can go out and lily dip for 3 hours. It's not that bad. But if you're paddling steady and paddling pretty hard for 3 hours, you're gonna start getting tired. You're gonna start feeling a little bit worn down. So that next hour and a half to me is like, okay, this is what you do when you're tired. And anything past that to me is like beating your body up unnecessarily. And I think it's probably become even more important the older I've gotten, I suppose too. But I don't feel the need to go out for 6 hours. Now, maybe I'm missing something. There are people that do that and they're great paddlers. But I've never felt the need, or certainly not the desire, when people say, hey, you want to go paddle this weekend? We're going to do a long paddle. Okay, what do you want to do? What about like they come up with some 5-hour training run? I'm like, can we shorten it up by 30 minutes, 45 minutes or something? And if they don't do it, then I'm like, well, I'm just not going. I'll do something on my own. I'll do a C1 or find somebody else to paddle with. But that's just the way I've done it. And, like I told you before, I've done a lot of training with Jeff and a lot of training with John. And we never did anything more than that either. I mean, if Jeff did anything longer than 4.5 hours, he never did it with me. So, maybe somebody else talked to him and doing the longer stuff. But I think after 4.5 hours, you're beating yourself up pretty good. And you're learning what it's like to sit in that seat for that long. And, I think after that, it's just the recovery time too. I mean, you got to get up and go to work the next day or something like that. So I just think, there's a lot to be said about not overdoing it. And I've never gotten done with a marathon and said, I probably should have done more longer paddles. If anything, I might say I should have worked a little harder on sprints or shallow water or, deep water or something like that. But, I've always felt pretty good about my endurance training and, I've hung in there pretty good in long hauls.
Yeah. Now where you're at in Onaway, so you're mostly on the Black River there when you're paddling?
Yeah, that's, I think the river, if I figured it out, I probably have a 6 or maybe 7 hour stretch of river from the top where I would start all the way to Sheboygan, maybe not quite that far, something like that. So I don't paddle the same section all the time just to mix it up. Sometimes I want to do deep stuff. Sometimes I want twisty stuff. Sometimes I just want something that's as close to home as possible. But the Black is just a couple miles outside of town, and I can get to almost any section of it in about the same amount of time to drive to it. So I train a lot on the Black River. And in recent years, maybe like last 6 or 7 years, I found the Akiak River on the other side of town, over out past Millersburg. It's really fun to paddle. It's one of my favorite stretches. In fact, sometimes for the marathon, they say, what's your favorite river to paddle on? I've chosen that a couple times for the announcer because nobody trains on it. I think maybe John and Sarah Webb have been over to paddle with me once or twice on it. It's really fun. You go through a couple different lakes and the river just kind of goes off into the woods. And there's this one spot where you get up into I think it's Lake Emma, which probably nobody that watching this podcast has ever heard of, but it's a small little lake. And it's really unusual because all these hills just filter, these hardwoods, oaks and maples just filter right down to the water. Usually it's flat, around lakes. And it's such a cool spot. I just really enjoy paddling there. But probably, most of my time is spent on the Black. And then once on the weekends, I'm usually heading down to Grayling or Maya or someplace like that to train with different people. And then when school gets out, I'm going down to the Sable, almost every time I'm training is down there. Not every time, but almost every time. In fact, when I was in college, I was coming up and staying at John's mom's house in Roscommon, and I would train there. I would just live there so I could train there every day.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I can see how, obviously you've spent a ton of time on that river, and being close is a huge advantage for people that are able to get on that body of water often.
Yeah. And, with me having 3 kids, like last year and, not last year because of the COVID, but this year and 2 years before, there were several times where I was training during my son's baseball practice. I would, Amber would take the girls to dance or to art class or something, and I needed to train. And Gabriel was playing baseball. He loves baseball. He's going to be a good little player himself someday. He is right now. But I would drop him off to practice, and his practice is about an hour and a half long. And I would book it over to the river, just a couple miles down the road, jump in and paddle an hour, and then head back and grab them. And, those days I knew I was getting only an hour. So I would train accordingly. You know, it wasn't like dinking around time. I was doing something short and hard. And, you know, there's a lot of value in those kind of training runs. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like people that in Grayling that want to paddle to Burton's or paddle to Stefan's, there's, you know, Burton's might be a little short, but you know, you go to Stefan's once or twice a week and you decide how you mix it up and how you're going to train. You're going to go hard the whole way. You're going to do pieces of it or whatever it is. There's a lot of value to work on in that. So I was, a little bit, you know, surprised and maybe a little impressed that I was able to get the shape I was in the last couple of springs, doing a lot of that 1 hour training stuff where that's all I could jam in there. And I was telling Patrick, we were training for the General Clinton, like, hey, I only got an hour in today, but tomorrow I'm getting an hour and 45 or whatever it is. You know, I always try to go different time frames too. I don't want to get used to paddling an hour and a half. Your body needs to get adjusted to different amounts, I suppose.
Yeah. So Steve, when it comes to the technical side of canoe racing, is there a couple things that you'd be able to share that you think are really important to this sport?
Well, the first thing I would share probably is, and there's a lot of people out there with really good paddling strokes. So I think I'll stick with something that I've been told I'm good at. I think I'm pretty good at it, but I've gotten some really good compliments from some really good paddlers on my ability to ride a wake. We talked earlier about people I've learned from. I was training on a long run. I used to get worked up for long training runs because earlier on I'd get wiped out, 3 hours in, I was just a piece of meat. I'd be training with Jeff and Jeff still wants to go hard and I can just barely hang in there. But I remember I was paddling I think I was in the C2 with John and we were paddling right next to my cousins, Ted and Jeff. And, it was a lot of that training it's go time. It's like, hey, we got to go hard to stick with these guys. But we were down there below McMaster's, coming into Parmalee and coming around some of these corners. And by this time, I had been doing marathons for several years. I'd gotten pretty good at wake riding, but that didn't stop them from taking a minute to stop paddling, put their paddles down, and start showing me with their hands, like, all right, here's where you want to put the C2 when we're here, and we're going around the corner. Like I joke with them. I said, you guys, when are you going to bring out the whiteboard or the chalkboard to show me these diagrams as we're going down the river? I said, they're just like talking to me like I'm an infant, but they really weren't. They were just trying to share what they had with me, and everybody had something to say about it. So for me, one of the technical parts that I've worked really hard at is riding waves. And, there's a lot of people who are good at it and a lot of people who still have a lot to learn. And I think it's just another one of those things. Like I never stop learning. I never think that I know it all. I'm always trying to get more information. And being that wake riding it changes based on who you're paddling next to, what the depth of the water is, if you're on a corner or not, if they're going hard or going easy. It's a real chess game. And I think that's been one of my strengths. I've been able to hang with people because I'm doing a good job there. And I'm really, really trying to be diligent on what they're doing. Beyond that, I worked early on in my career about being really smooth. I was trying to be smooth. And that was largely because I didn't have a lot of power, so I darn well better be able to match my partners. So I was always trying to make sure I did a good job of that. And I think I learned that pretty well. And I think I've done pretty well there. Now, more recent years, I've gotten stronger. So sometimes that smoothness goes away a little bit, but I've always tried to keep a flat boat, lean it up when I have to, but not if I don't have to. Like I'd rather keep the boat flat. And something a lot of people in Michigan, I think, don't want to do is paddle same side, whether it's going around a corner. They'd rather have one guy drawing his guts out and the bow guy pulling on the inside, the stern guy doing draw strokes on the outside. I want the boat to be as flat as it can. I want it going as fast as it can. And one of the ways I can do that is, hopefully setting up for the corner really well. But beyond that, paddling same side if we need to. And that's one of the things I did learn from John. When we'd be on a side wave of somebody, instead of having a big draw stroke or putting in a rudder, which totally slows the boat down, go same side on the inside, keep the boat going straight. We were able to hang on to teams just by doing that. It looks awkward. It looks uncomfortable for people. It's not a pretty looking thing, but man, is it slick. And you ask Butch, keep a flat boat, paddle straight ahead. You're going to be in good shape. And one more thing I'll say about that too, kind of that end, my cousin Ted, he chewed me out this summer. He saw me at maybe the Spikes race and saw that, man, I don't know if it was a Spikes race, but he saw me racing anyhow. No, you know what it was? It was the sprint for the Spikes race. And going underneath the bridge there, he saw me going around the corner on the buoy, and I started to reach out to the side, and that slows the boat down. And he's like, but he's like talking to me like I'm still 18 years old. He's like, better. You should reach out and get your power out front and push away from the boat. And his advice is something different than what most people would do, but he and Jeff did it, and it absolutely works. When you're trying, instead of drawing around the corner, getting your paddle out wide and bringing the paddle to the boat slows the back end down. He says, reach out forward more and get the paddle close to the boat, and then I don't want to say a sweeping stroke, but you push that. If you get your power out closer to the middle of the boat, it's going to keep the back end. You're still going to turn. And he's absolutely right. I watched it on video. I said, yep, I was doing that. And then I thought about that for 14 and a half hours in the marathon.
Nice. So Steve, we're winding down, but just a couple more. I'm always curious to talk to people about equipment a little bit. Are you kind of set on one particular boat that you prefer to paddle for the marathon, or have you been in a few different C2s over the years?
I've done the race in the Hassel boat and the V1, and more recently with the JD Pro 2. So I've kind of had several different versions. I really like the V1 for a long time because it's a real user-friendly boat. You could jump in with just about anybody, and I was always training with different people, racing with different people. So if you throw them in a V1, you know what you're going to get, and it's easily adjustable, I guess, and you can make recovery faster. Same, especially on waves, and it handles big waves too. But when you're riding a wake, if you screw up, you can kind of get it back pretty quick. And I found the JD Pro 2 is kind of the same thing. It's very similar to that. It surprises me how many people are paddling, the Corbins. And I only say that because, I trained in that with Jeff quite a bit. And I mean, even with him, I had some struggles with us riding waves and stuff like that. And I think people are always looking for the fastest boat, but sometimes the fastest boat might not be the fastest boat for you. Sometimes a little more control is good. I'll paddle whatever, but I've been a little bit more on the comfort side than the skinny little, the Corbins are really fast, but I've never raced them in a big race, but some shorter races. And, if you're out in open water, they go like crazy, but lots of times you're not out in open water. So I've been sticking to the more basic boats like the V1s and the JD Pro 2s.
Okay. So Steve, do you have some goals already set for next season?
I don't, because normally I would. This is I'm maybe heading into some uncharted territory with next year. I was sitting there before the marathon on Peninsular Street. We got there way too early. Man, we have to get there way too early for that race. It's just with the announcing and all that. I just want to get there at the last possible second. But we were there, it was probably like 6 o'clock, 6:30, and the kids needed to eat. My wife had gone in to get some pizza from, maybe it's Baird M Pizzeria or somebody like that right there in town. We're just sitting on the edge, and my kids are sitting with me, and you can feel the energy, and the nerves had been piling up for me like earlier than normal this year, like way back with the curly race. Danny Medina and I had a really good curly race. From that time forward, I was kind of nerved up for the race, and I thought, I just don't know, why do I keep doing this to myself? You get in the race, you do well, all that stuff. And it's like, okay, this is why I do it. But I don't know. I don't know if I'm ever going to do as well as I just did. Ninth place, I've had a few ninth places now, but 14 hours, 27 minutes, probably never going to get water like that for the rest of my life. I'm turning 50 in February.
Okay.
So, I kind of decided before the race started, that was it for the marathon. And I said that to my dad afterwards. And of course, my wife says, I'll see it when I believe it. I'll tell you this, coming into like a year or two ago, I had set a goal that I wanted to set the record for the 50 and over. The challenge for that is, of course, you got to find a 50-year-old partner or more that can do it. And some of the people I have in mind are younger than me, maybe by a year or two. So that's still kind of out there. I mean, I would turn 50 next year. I'm the one who called Patrick the last couple of times to see about racing with him. I don't know, what his thoughts are on there. I'm sure he'll come do the marathon, whether it's with me or somebody else. He'll be here. But I also kind of thought to myself, my son, he loves baseball. He's only 10 years old, and the family's been great with me. This has just been part of my life and their life since they've been born, the kids and everything. And I kind of feel like I owe something to him or them a little bit. So we had him do a tryout for a travel baseball team over in Petoskey, and
okay,
we're gonna do that. He's gonna do that this year. I don't know how many tournaments he's gonna do. Could I do serious racing and that? Maybe. But I want him to have a chance to do something special like that. And if I end up, I have a hard time looking at the months of March, April, and May without being in a boat. So, so the challenge is I always train like I'm doing the marathon, whether I do it or not. So am I going to work out after deer season ends? Yeah, probably. I'm probably going to just go do my normal things and then kind of see what happens. But usually I have a real good idea what I want to do for the year. This year, it's really wide open. The only thing I know is I want to make sure Gabriel gets a chance to play some baseball this summer.
Awesome.
So while I say that, anybody who's watching this is like, thinking Steve might be a good partner for the marathon. Some superstar is like, okay, listen, I'm human. Like, I'm open to suggestions.
Sure. Well, Steve, lastly, I'd like to just give you an opportunity if there's anyone else or maybe a longtime sponsor or anyone else that's kind of helped you along the way with your paddling career.
Well, I mentioned a lot of the people that taught me stuff and a lot of the people I trained with, people I raced with. So all those people, obviously, I mean, they've been huge to me. My Aunt Janet for having introduced me to the race that first year in 1987, my cousin Mark for being in it. The next year, 88, following the race, again with Jeff and my cousin Winnie. Those people have all been really big to helping me out, to taking care of me when I was growing up in the sport. I might have been 20 years old, but you're still just a dumb kid. And so they're definitely influential. I could never do any of this stuff now without Amber. It's a big sacrifice, huge, really. I mean, because she likes to train for stuff. She races, she runs and she works out. It's a juggling act, and there's so many times that I just expect her to have the schedule figured out because, I'm going training after school today, that kind of thing. And sometimes she's like, no, you have to do this first. Or maybe, I could not do it without her, for sure. And then as far as sponsors, we've had the Chat and Chew restaurant down in Glenny, cool little restaurant down there. I remember following the race for so many years and seeing people pulled in there on their way to Loud Dam. And I always thought, what a cool little spot. And I said, I'm going to go in there and see if they would sponsor somebody. And, they've been really good to us over the years. And in more recent years, the Klaus family, again, out of Glenny, helping us with sponsorship. They have the Ace Hardware, and they've got an Ace Hardware in Sheboygan, which is my backyard too. Sure. Basically, they've sponsored us. John Sullivan in one form or another. He and Cheryl have sponsored my teams with Treasure Title, and then this year with my goddaughter. All his kids are my godkids. Summer wrote a book, and she's got a book series, so they sponsored us, and they sponsored Ryan Halstead too. So we share the same sponsorship. These are some of the people that have helped me out in that regard. And then just the people around the race committee. They're just like, Joe Wakely, Phil Weiler, Steve Southard, seeing those people, John Shervin, it's just so hard to ever step away from this race. Like I keep thinking like, I'm done. But then in the back of my mind, I think I'm going to be doing this when I'm 70. It's just seeing those people and all the people I grew up watching and being friends with, Rick Joy, Clark Kent, Dave Shepard, Lynn Whitty, all these people that I've looked up to and admired. I mean, they're still like gods to me. That they've had such an influence on me. If they didn't know directly, certainly indirectly. And, I've just been admirers of all of them for so long that when I've been able to race with some of them and maybe beat some of them or do some of the things that they were able to do, having good finishes, it's just kind of mind blowing, to be honest with you.
Awesome. Well, Steve, thanks so much for your time and for sharing all of that. I think people are really going to enjoy, having to listen to this. So thanks again.
Well, I appreciate being here, and it's been a good time. Thanks a lot.
Take care.
All right.